This is Pearl Harbor, and it is burning again. But there are no Japanese planes in the sky. Why are no bombs falling?
It is May 21, 1944, and the disaster is coming from inside America's own naval base. Thousands of men are about to sail into one of the biggest battles of the Pacific War. But before they can leave Pearl Harbor, one mistake turns preparation for battle into a catastrophe. Within minutes, the U.S. Navy faces a nightmare it cannot afford to explain. If Japan learns what happened here, the next operation could be at risk. So the story is pushed into silence. This is the secret Pearl Harbor disaster of 1944. And in this video, you will learn not only how it happened, but why almost nobody remembers it. To understand why one accident could become so dangerous, we have to look at what Pearl Harbor had become by the spring of 1944. After the Japanese attack in 1941, Pearl Harbor was no longer only a symbol of American loss. It had become one of the engines of the Pacific War. Ships came in damaged and left repaired. Fuel, ammunition, trucks, tanks, food, landing craft, spare parts, and thousands of men moved through the base. Every new island campaign depended on this machine working faster than the enemy could react. By May 1944, that machine was preparing for the next major step across the Pacific, the invasion of the Mariana Islands. For most of the men waiting in the harbor, the target was still unknown, but the schedule was not. The fleet had to leave. The invasion could not wait. That urgency shaped every decision. In West Loch, a quieter part of Pearl Harbor, away from the famous battleship row, landing ships were being loaded for war. These were LSTs, landing ship tank, flat-bottomed vessels built to carry men and heavy equipment straight onto enemy beaches. On paper, they were practical. In reality, once fully loaded, they became something far more dangerous. Each ship carried troops, vehicles, ammunition, fuel, equipment, and smaller landing craft. The Navy needed them packed tightly because war rewards speed. But speed has a cost. West Loch was becoming a parking lot for floating danger. Ships were nested side by side. Fuel drums sat near ammunition. Work crews moved cargo. Some men were trained for the job, some were not. There had already been warning signs during rehearsals near Maui. Rough weather, accidents with landing craft, damaged equipment, and crews still learning how to handle a complicated amphibious operation. The system was already under stress, but no one had the luxury of slowing it down. That is the first important point of this story. The West Loch disaster was not simply caused by one careless man. It was created by a wartime system that kept pushing men, ships, and explosives closer together, because the invasion timetable mattered more than perfect safety. At 3:08 in the afternoon, that system broke. The first explosion erupted aboard LST-353. At first, many people did not know what had happened. Some thought the base was under attack. Others suspected sabotage. In a harbor still haunted by December 7th, the idea of another enemy strike did not seem impossible. But the truth was worse in a different way. The danger was not outside the harbor. It was already built into the way the harbor was being used. The first blast started fires on nearby vessels. Then fuel and ammunition turned those fires into a chain reaction. The exact cause has never been settled with certainty. Investigators considered several possibilities: gasoline vapor, smoking near fuel, welding work nearby, or ammunition mishandled by men who may not have been properly trained for the task. The people closest to the first explosion could not explain it afterward. They were gone before the investigation began. A crowded harbor, loaded ships, fuel beside explosives, inexperienced men, wartime pressure, rules that existed but were not always followed. A military machine moving so fast that danger became normal. After the first explosion, the situation did not stabilize, it multiplied. More explosions followed. Ships that should have been able to escape were trapped by their own lines, by other ships, or by the chaos around them. Crews tried to move vessels away from the burning area, but the very act of moving made the danger spread. The harbor was no longer a base. It was a chain reaction with anchors, engines, ropes, fuel, and ammunition. Then came the part that could have made the disaster even worse. Several burning LSTs broke loose and began drifting toward the naval ammunition depot. Nearby, the cargo ship Joseph B. Francis still had hundreds of tons of ordnance aboard. This was the nightmare inside the nightmare. If the drifting ships reached the depot, Pearl Harbor might face a disaster far larger than the one already unfolding. At one point, PT boats were sent with orders that could have forced American crews to torpedo their own burning ships before those ships reached the ammunition area. That detail reveals how serious the danger had become. The Navy was not only fighting fire, it was trying to stop its own fleet from becoming a weapon against its own base. For hours, tugboats, fireboats, and harbor crews fought to regain control. Some vessels were pulled away, others sank before they could reach the ammunition depot. Fires continued into the night. Explosions continued long after the first blast. By the next morning, the immediate danger was finally contained. But the cost was already clear enough. 6 LSTs were lost or so badly damaged that they could not take part in the coming operation. Other landing craft and amphibious vehicles were destroyed. Buildings around West Loch were damaged. Officially, 163 men were killed or missing, and 396 were injured. Some later accounts disputed those numbers, partly because the fleet moved out so quickly afterward. And that is one of the strangest parts of the story. The war did not stop. On the command desks already lay 2 documents, the report on the disaster and the plan for the next invasion. One demanded answers, the other demanded silence. The fleet was already in motion, and the Navy could not tell the world what had happened at West Loch. Survivors were warned not to speak about what they had seen. Letters home could not describe the fire, the explosions, or the ships lost in West Loch. The Navy released only a brief statement, enough to admit that something had happened, but not enough to reveal why it mattered. A court of inquiry examined the disaster, but its report was classified as top secret. It would not be declassified until 1960. By then, the war was long over. The men had returned home, or not. The headlines had moved on. Pearl Harbor remained one of the most famous places in American memory, but West Loch became a shadow inside that memory. The final lesson was uncomfortable. The disaster had exposed real dangers in how combat-loaded ships were handled. Ammunition and fuel too close together, ships nested too tightly, workers not always trained for the danger in front of them. Some recommendations called for safer loading and more spacing between vessels. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, did not stop the invasion schedule. Across Pearl Harbor, damaged ships were counted, replacement vessels were assigned, and new loading orders moved across command desks. Safety had been exposed as a problem, but the Pacific campaign was already moving too fast to pause. So West Loch did not change the course of the war. The invasion of the Marianas went ahead. Saipan was invaded in June. American industrial power replaced lost ships and equipment. Strategically, the disaster became a delay, not a defeat. History often remembers wars through battles, victories, and famous attacks. But wars are also built on docks, fuel drums, repair crews, supply lines, and crowded harbors. West Loch matters because it showed that the rear of the war could become as dangerous as the front. West Loch was buried not because nothing happened, but because it happened in the worst place and at the worst time, inside Pearl Harbor, just before a major invasion. In 1941, Pearl Harbor had already become a national wound. In 1944, it burned again. But this time, America did not need to explain an enemy attack. It needed to hide its own disaster. And if you want more stories about hidden history, dangerous decisions, and the engineering mistakes that changed the course of war, subscribe to What, Where, and Why channel. Because sometimes the most important part of history is the part they tried to keep quiet.